Before we get started today, I wanted to review a couple of housekeeping items. First of all of your lines are muted, so please use the question feature on your control panel to ask questions throughout the session. Today's presentation will last approximately 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A session, so again, feel free to ask questions throughout, and we will hold those till the end. You'll also notice at the top of your control panel on the left-hand side, there's a button with double arrows. You can click this button to collapse your control panel. We will be recording today's presentation, and a link to the recording will be made available to everyone afterwards. So with that, I will turn it over to Solutions IQ.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Lopestite from Solutions IQ, and I wanted to welcome you all to this morning's presentation on Project Portfolio Management with AgileEVM. Our presenter this morning is Brent Barton, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Solutions IQ, and he will tell a bit more about himself at the beginning of the presentation. Solutions IQ is located in Redmond, Washington, and we offer a full spectrum of services to develop software and fulfill technical talent needs while improving your Agile knowledge and capabilities. We help our clients to improve technical capabilities through acknowledged expertise in Agile practices and methodologies, Agile consulting and training led by practicing senior developers and project managers, outsourced software development conducted in our Advanced Development Center, and talent acquisition driven by expert recruiters in the most advanced recruiting tools. You can find out more about us by visiting our website at www.solutionsiq.com. So now I would like to turn it over to Brent.
Thank you, Jeff. Today we're talking about project portfolio management with Agile Earned Value Management, and it's a topic I really enjoy because I got involved with it a number of years ago, and we've written a couple of papers, one of which is in the IEEE, which establishes it rigorously. I'm passionate about Agile, and I'm passionate more about delivering software well, and been around for quite a while, from small companies to very large IT organizations. And so in the next hour, we're going to explore project portfolio management. And we want to do from different perspectives to give us some context so that we can understand how AgileEVM can help us. The reason this is important to me is because I've found that a lot of organizations can start an Agile team, several Agile teams, but it's not always the case that in scaled environments, companies can take advantage of what Agile has to offer. And that can be very difficult. So capitalizing on that is what is important to me and causing me to talk now. So with that, I'd like to introduce Robert, CIO. He has a $110 million Agile budget. And of course, like most CIOs, always has to fulfill on existing projects already underway, yet has a stream of new business initiatives, and somehow, with all those constraints, needs to make the business units happy. Also like to introduce Janet, the Director of Projects. Janet reports to the CIO. She must prioritize and rank projects, is responsible for the overall project delivery, and has found that whenever she applies more controls to projects, there seems to be this counter effect, and change seems to grow more. And as a result of that, she's found that she has to be able to be flexible, which creates quite a few challenges. So one day, Robert asks, how are the projects in the portfolio doing? Janet's thinking, simple, direct question, no problem. Janet points Robert to the dashboard. What you see on the right is my view of a typical dashboard. We have the red, yellow, green stoplights, and in its simplistic form, that seems logical. But when we start getting all of those things that are in flight, all those new initiatives that are just starting up, instead of it being a nice, simple crossroad, it seems to be more like a set of roads that are somehow converging like this picture that you see here, where they seem to be coming in from all different directions. And on closer inspection, you find there needs to be new lights that aren't really just red, yellow, green. And there seems to be some projects seem to have yellow and red all at the same time. So what's really going on? So what is Robert supposed to make of this? And are project statuses really the most important thing? So let's take a look at project portfolio management, PPM. We really want to measure outcomes, not outputs. So big yes on business value, which of course business value is this set of terms that seems to be hard to put your arms around. What is business value? We can sense it when we know it's there, but it's actually rather hard to define. So I might describe it this way, the old S-curve that many of you are familiar with business value as being something that is potentially measured in dollars, could be measured in other ways, and not outputs. We don't want to measure, we want to measure outputs, but not so much all of the projects that we've completed, not the deliverables. We really want to focus on business value, and modern project portfolio management tells us that. So what can management do? And what can Janet do? Because clearly she's asking for help. It's a challenge for her when the traditional dashboard and all those things that come up with project status, which are clearly output driven, create a problem. So effective project portfolio management requires prioritization to maximize business value, effective delivery to minimize costs, and reallocation of resources when those costs are too high or the benefit that you're realizing isn't really living up to what we expected based upon the costs and the investment that we have. For those of you that are familiar with Scrum, and I assume most people have touched it a little bit, effective Scrum project management requires prioritization to maximize business value, effective delivery to minimize costs, and in the books, this is right out of the literature, reallocation of resources when costs are too high or the benefit is too low. Notice any similarities to the portfolio management. Now, even though the Scrum literature describes this reallocation of resources, I have found, and I'm not convinced, that organizations are well equipped to do this. I remember I was with a CIO and his project steering committee, and we were having a discussion, and he said, how do we stop writing blank checks to things that we should stop doing? And I thought about that, and we had a discussion, and I realized on reflection that that is a huge challenge organizations have. Organizations are not always equipped to stop things because they're measuring outputs and not necessarily business outcomes. So that's a challenge that we might think about. Here's a Scrum framework. It starts with a vision and the product backlog, which is stack ranked by the product owners, of which the team or teams pull from that product backlog, and they create their own sprint plans, which are essentially mini work breakdown structures, or WBSs. They focus on committing and delivering on that work in a time box, which is a couple of weeks, maybe it's up to 4. And at the end of that, they do a demonstration of potentially shippable product increments. And then they tune and reflect and adjust so that they have a continuous improvement program. And they go back and take that next set of highest priority features. The key Scrum concepts for this presentation is that we ask for stack ranked prioritization based on business value and risk, where risk may influence or risk is specifically attributed to the ability to attain business value. So there is that a little bit of a nuance there. Self-organizing cross-functional teams. This is one of the core key concepts from Scrum, and self-organizing cross-functional teams are the ones that we ask to commit and deliver. So it's extremely important within the ability to achieve that business value, that we have that team that has all the functional aspects needed in order to get to a potentially shippable state. The risk of not having that is that potentially shippable becomes very difficult to understand or question. Understanding the difference of what we're able to do in a sprint versus a release is captured in a definition of done. That is a key need that we have within an organization, because the definition of done helps us know what the gap between what we're able to deliver in a sprint and what we need to deliver in a release really means. Because potentially shippable increments are extremely important. Now, we measure the productivity of that team using velocity. Velocity is a measure of the business value that's been attained based upon the size of the work that we've taken on. So it measures things from the product backlog, not a duration or a capacity estimate. And that's our velocity. So Scrum supports two project portfolio management features at the release level, I'm asserting. Prioritization to maximize business value and effective delivery to minimize costs. By my previous argument, I don't believe that the reallocation of resources is actually possible with Scrum, because that's an organizational challenge. And when I look at the reallocation of resources, costs, in other words, money, is the important thing. And Scrum talks about schedule performance, but not about cost performance or cost management. So let's take a look at earned value management. What you see here is the beginnings of standard earned value management chart. You see that S-curve. Business value has been replaced with dollars, and you see what we're calling planned value associated with that S-curve. At some completion date, which is derived, we can then establish what's called a project management baseline. This is all very well documented in the literature. I love the fact that it's called out that there's a management reserve. I found that many Agile teams don't create an appropriate buffer for the reality. And that gives us a total allocated budget. So we're able to talk in business terms, which is dollars or other financial units. At some point in time, let's call it time now, we're able to measure the actual cost. We're able to then calculate the earned value associated with that. And then we can extrapolate those curves out further using well-documented mathematics that's within earned value. As we extend the planned value, we find an intersection which helps us understand what the project slippage will be. So now, in this example, what you're seeing is the actual completion date looks more like the intersection of the green and the blue dots over there to the right. And in addition to that, you see estimate at complete, where you're tracking that same point on the horizontal axis up to the red line. And that gives us our estimate at complete. And that's what earned value management helps us understand. So the key concepts that we have with earned value are that it integrates cost and schedule performance. It forecasts in financial units based on units used for this, what we call actual cost. So this actual cost should be in the same financial units as a project management baseline. And examples might be a burden cost, a burn rate, allocated time. With allocated time, that becomes a little challenging if you have non-labor costs and you wanted to track that in your, and that's within your project management baseline. Unlike team velocity, actual cost is additive across teams. Now, this is an important reality, and this is something that can be a slippery slope when organizations try to manage and measure and compare one team's productivity based on velocity against another team's productivity based on velocity. Velocity is the measure of work that's been accomplished from the product backlog, and each team is asked to, as a team, estimate the work that it can do. So it's providing the estimates of the items on the product backlog. Those values are not additive because one team's estimates is not the same as another team's estimates. And we strongly advocate, I'd like to say it even more strongly than that, but let's leave it at that. Strongly advocate that we do not associate velocity to any sort of time-based units. We have other ways of dealing with that because then you can't actually measure productivity with velocity. As a result of having the individual teams do their estimating and one team doesn't estimate exactly the same as another team, those velocities are not additive. However, when we're talking about actual costs, those are real costs and those are additive across teams. So that's a great feature that earned value has that Scrum does not, because it does not integrate cost and schedule performance. The other nice thing about earned value is that it's an ANSI standard, and you see the number there. So I would like to revisit these characteristics of project portfolio management and this additional feature of reallocation of resources when costs are too high or benefit is too low. If we have that ability to prioritize against business value, and Scrum helps us there, then EVM helps us on the cost side of a cost-benefit equation. So we're able to actually recognize and understand how to do that. So I am excited about that. So let's go visit Janet. What can Janet do so that she can get out of that quandary? Well, if we can combine those two parts of Agile and Scrum and EVM and get AgileEVM, maybe life gets better. So a little background on AgileEVM. In the paper, it's available on the website. It's been mathematically proven that release dates based on average velocity are identically equal to estimate at complete. In other words, a schedule-based performance metric of average velocity using Scrum is identically equal, mathematically equal, to estimate at complete, which is measured in dollars or other financial units. With one key assumption that is true, and that is the ratio of story points completed over total story points in a release is a good measure of actual percent complete. I'd argue that compared to some of the other ways that people recommend measuring percent complete, that this is an excellent measure. I would like to also emphasize that story points completed really in Scrum terms, we're integrating Scrum terms so we can claim all of those aspects of Scrum. Story points completed should be accepted by the product owner, okay? And the total story points in a release should really include all of the work in our definition of done, and if there's any gaps between Sprint's definition of done and what we also must do in order to actually do a release, that also be in that release plan. Okay, in terms measured in story points. So if that's the case, that assumption can be asserted, then the mathematics is really quite simple. So there's a little background on AgileEVM. So let's meet Katie, a project manager. Katie reports to the director of projects, Janet, and uses Scrum well. She's a great servant leader. This is my moment for a soapbox. Team exhibits technical craftsmanship. The influence of good self-organizing cross-functional team that employs good technical craftsmanship is something worth investing in your organization, because it is that gives us the ability to have the technical feedback to provide great results. And without that, sometimes we're surprised way too late into a project. Things that I'm including in technical craftsmanship are not just great code that's easy to read, that runs, but also is technical, tested well, especially with automated tests, continuous integration, and those kinds of technical practices help us be able to know where we are all the time. And that's a great thing to have. Off my soapbox, back to Katie. Date is fixed. Always seems to be, according to Katie, is that we always seem to have a date that is fixed, yet requirements seem to nuance with every sprint review, and that tends to influence scope. Nuance, I've found, that can be very different from, hey, we just realized that we have an entirely different way of doing things that we're going to employ. And that often happens when you give customers feedback. They might say, yes, that's exactly what I asked for. Now that I see it, I see how we can do it an even better way. And that might be a great thing to invest, and that's what iterations do. It helps us get to the right place. Sometimes requirements nuance in more subtle terms. Sometimes they're very large. Yes, that's absolutely how we want it to run. However, we may need to redesign because we just learned about a new kind of opportunity that will increase business value that's going to cause us to have to maybe support a much larger audience, things like that. So nuance can be very large or it can be very small, but I find that every time I show software to users that things nuance just a little bit. And this asterisk off that nuance is too sad but true. For those people that think they can completely specify a system, here's some rigor so that you can take that back. It's not possible to completely specify an interactive system. Uncertainty is inherent and inevitable in software. And worst of all, from the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon, for a new software system, the requirements will not be completely known until after the users have used it. So Watts-Humphreys, requirements uncertainty principle, helps us understand that it's worth spending the time to figure out how to integrate change management into your software development projects, releases, and your organization as a whole. So Katie is using AgileEVM. Katie has a $500,000 government project with a single release. Katie helps the team plan and replan because she's using Scrum, and that's one of the hallmarks is we start with a plan and we continue to replan and recognize that inevitable things happen as we show software to users. So let's take a look. Katie has a project worksheet using AgileEVM, and I'm going to move over to Excel so I can show you this spreadsheet and how Katie has used this on that. So let me pop up here. Okay, so we are now looking at a spreadsheet of Project X, which is Katie's sheet. I'm going to go ahead and go to full screen so that we can see it just a little bit better. Okay, so the easy thing about this spreadsheet, which granted looks rather complicated, is that we only need to capture 5 initial parameters. That's these items in gray. And then we only need to capture these 4 items each sprint or each iteration. Okay, so what we can do is you see here we start off with planned iterations being 30, the iteration length being 7, the initial story points being 488. Here's your initial budget, and here's the start date. Those are the only parameters we need for the original baseline. The variables that we need to capture each sprint is the sprint number and the story points completed. The story points added during the period of the sprint to the product backlog. This is important. We don't actually add story points to the sprint necessarily. That's an unusual situation. We avoid doing that. This is actually talking about the points that have been added to the release or the product backlog, the portion of it that represents the release. Okay? And then we have the cost per iteration. Now the cost per iteration, again, if it's in the units as the same as the budget at complete, then we are calibrating effectively. So if that has non-labor costs in it and you spend some money, I would expect to see that in the cost in that iteration when that money was spent. Okay. Everything else is calculated for you. Okay, so you see a running total of the actual costs at each sprint. You see earned value, planned value, cost variance, schedule variance, cost performance indicator, schedule performance indicator. All of these are documented. The budgeted cost per story point, which you notice is changing based upon updating the actual scope. You see here on right here, you see where some points were removed from the backlog. Here, a large number were added, and so it calibrates that. And then we have the actual cost per story point. Okay, all of that is calculated for you. It's, the spreadsheet is available, and it's pretty well documented. So we see some indicators. Currently, we're documented through iteration 30. Okay. We've got iteration 30. The average velocity across 30, across those 30 iterations is 32. The iteration velocity at yesterday's weather of 30 is 116. Here's our cost performance. It's over 1. 1 means on plan, so slightly ahead of the game in cost. Schedule performance tells us we're a little bit behind. Okay, and our actual cost is 475 versus earned value of 487 and planned value of 538. Okay, so our cost variance is good. Our schedule variance is not good. So what does all that mean? Well, here's how many points we have left, which is 101. Here was our planned release date based on those initial parameters of August 19th. And then, using mean velocity or normal estimate at complete, they're identically equal. We have a target date of September 9th, and here's what we believe it will cost optimistically. This is actually an optimistic measure. Okay? Pessimistic measures, which is another way of checking things out, and you can see it's based on indices that helps us temper what these pieces are. Again, all available in the literature and the project management body of knowledge and others literature as well. You see that we're really looking for quite a late date, not just a couple weeks late, but potentially it could be quite late. And of course, the costs then are a budget overrun. Atypical. This is actually a value that helps us when things are not as well understood or there's a lot of volatility in a project. And I've found using some, researching some projects and following this, is that the volatility of atypical estimates actually does pretty well when we're early into a project. So it's actually not a bad measure. So it's worth looking at. Like all data, this is forecasting, just like estimates. They're not absolutes. They're approximations. They help you make good decisions. They help you do some what-if analysis. They don't solve and tell you exactly what's going to happen, because we all know that software is too complicated. The thing I like about AgileEVM is that it does integrate change management, and that's represented by this column here, story points added. So as scope changes, we're able to keep up with what happens. Okay? So showing you a little bit more on the spreadsheet, we have a velocity. What you see here is the numbers of a particular part of the iteration. You can see we've got quite a bit of change, and yet the average velocity is actually tempering us pretty well. You have a release burn down, which helps us see where things are. And we're looking at 13 on. The other parts I can just unhide and we could see the rest, and I'll do that in a moment. And then the CPI and the SPI. cost performance index and schedule performance index, which are true EVM measures, we can also measure. And the nice thing is to recognize that these are all good correlators, and they give us the data that we need, find valuable through Scrum, and they give us data that may be in the language that you want to hear from other non-Agile business colleagues that really are more used to different kinds of measures. So that gives us a number of different perspectives. I'm going to go ahead and unhide the data here so we can see all of it. Okay, and you'll see that everything recalibrates itself so that we can actually see what's going on over the entire project, which is kind of a nice feature that we have. And then we can also use a unintended feature. This unintended feature is to update this planned iterations if we were to re-baseline. I actually have data, this project completed after 32 sprints. And so if we take a look at that, we see where things are. We're at 32, velocity, the average velocity, yesterday's weather. The reason these aren't identically equal at 1.02 and 0.98, those should be all 1 when we've completed a project, is because there was 22 points in this data gathering that did not complete. But what you do see is that all of these dates were started to converge. Okay, so we're able to see how those dates were converging on the correct thing. And because I essentially changed this initial parameters through that unintended feature, which allows me to show a little more on this spreadsheet, you see that was the actual planned release date. Okay. So if I were to go a little bit further back into this project, I would find that our actual, what it looks like is at iteration 22, average velocity, and here we're starting to run into some problem. Look at our schedule performance. We're in potentially really big trouble. So our, ignore that, that was really 9.9. 10.1, March 14th, September 26th. These numbers are showing us that we're all over the map and we really don't know where we are. And we have a lot of churn. So we can go back and look at graphs, we can look at the detailed numbers, and this starts to tell us why. We have high rate of churn in the velocity. The release burn down is having a lot of burn ups associated with it, and schedule performance is just started to really go down below, and now they're both underneath. And when you have a schedule performance starting to show up like 0.6, you've got some real issues. Okay? The nice thing about the end of this project, and kudos to the team as well as Katie, is that when they actually finished this project, they were able to bring it in on time. And a large part of that was some of the what-if scenarios that you were able to use within this system. Okay? So that's a quick view into a single project, and this spreadsheet is available if you're interested in taking a look at it. Again, all of the data, all of the formulas are fairly well documented, so if you were to want to make it your own, feel free to do so. And with that, I want to come back. Whoops, it's not where I meant to be. I meant to come back to this. Sorry. I need to open up another spreadsheet to take a look at the portfolio. Okay, so, sorry about that. Thought I had that open. It's going to take a couple of moments here. There we go. I'm on a virtual machine, so Apologize for that. Awkward silence happening. So AgileEVM, as we're waiting for that, is being used by a number of organizations, large and small. Some government organizations are able to use that. The thing that's good about it is because it's based on rigor and based upon the actual facts. The core of when I was interested in it first was some people were saying we have to use EVM, so therefore we cannot use Agile. And this helps us because we can actually say that, yes, you can use that. Organizations are still challenged by setting up your work packages early on within Scrum, and that's a very specific challenge that's unique to every organization of how do we actually put some Agile processes into our system, which has maybe more traditional approaches, waterfall, other kinds, so that we can deliver and take advantage of what Agile has to offer. So there are those things. Well, we are now back onto this. I'm going to go ahead and enable those things, and here we go. So this is a pretty straightforward portfolio management spreadsheet. The things that are additive, again, are financial units. So what you see is a budget at complete that is summed up across these 4 projects. By the way, all of these projects that you see here are based on slightly cleansed real data. So these are real projects that really have been worked on and completed. So they represent actual EVM data. Okay, and then you see the sum of actual costs. We can also sum earned values, planned values, and from that information we can calculate a portfolio CPI, and in this set of projects we see that our cost performance is very high, but unfortunately, and at a portfolio level, 0.98 can be significant, is we see an interesting challenge because the schedule performance isn't doing so well. Does that mean that we're underinvesting and thus our schedule is slipping? What does that mean? The thing I like about metrics is they don't really tell you exactly what to do about something, but they do inform you so you can ask good questions. Okay? In addition to that, we can see the estimate at complete across all of the portfolios, and for each of these things we've carried over the planned release dates and the release date optimistic, that's what that one is, and the atypical date. So we can take a look at some parameters. We could have brought over a number more things, but I think this is good enough. So one of the things we could do is we could say, well, let's take a look at, let's say that Katie is actually a name of a program, and then there's some other person that isn't so good as Katie, and that there's a program. We might want to look at it, some program level things, so we can go ahead and do that. And let's take a look at how are the projects under program Katie performing. And we see that the cost is very good. Schedule performance is under in general. Okay? So if we go back and look at the budgets on these, what we see is that the estimate at complete is fairly close to in line on the first one and quite a bit under on the second one. And the planned dates are somewhat in line, but maybe not exactly in line. Are those dates important, or are they not important? These are the questions that we can ask, and then from a portfolio level, as far as how we're measuring against those financial units that we have carefully chosen to give us good insight, we can see how that program is performing against budget. So that gives us some numbers from an Agile context that we like. Let's take a look at this other program that we just called Brent, and we see that the cost performance is okay, the schedule performance is okay. However, as we look at this one project, we see that one is really quite good and the other one is rather bad. And so let's take a closer look at this second project, this project C. And we see that, let's go ahead and filter on that for a second and take a look at it in particular. Well, what we see is that we're going to lose money on that or something like that, depending on what those financial units are. We have this planned release date, and looks like we may be just a little bit behind. Okay. Now, in some organizations that have a release train, those likely dates could be very difficult. They might be very difficult indeed. They might be quite simple. So it's just a matter of what does it mean for these dates to look like they're slightly variable, not variable, things like that. So it helps us at least look at things in a quick and easy way. Quick scan gives us some information that this one right here, the project Y, really has a significant challenge potentially in that the planned date was the 7th of January, but this could be as much as almost a month late looking at this. Okay? However, the cost is very high. So the budget is, if I go over here, the budget is $1 million and looks like we're going to come in at $845,000. So it might give us information to go talk to our customer and say, you know, it looks like we're a little bit late on schedule, but as we're tracking now, we are actually coming in quite a bit under budget. Is it worth it to you to try to bring that date in at high cost, or may we potentially share the value of that lower cost by allowing it to deliver a little late? And I've found that that insight is not something I've always had available to me. So there's a quick look at portfolio management and AgileEVM from the spreadsheets. And I'm going to now go back over to the presentation and come back and finish up. Okay. So a few notes about extending AgileEVM to the portfolio, because again, we're talking about project portfolio management and how AgileEVM might be able to help us. Well, for one, AgileEVM can coexist with EVM at the portfolio level. I say with caution because the fact that Scrum integrates change management into the system, and AgileEVM, in order to support Scrum fully, needs to do the same, and therefore it does. Okay? So it has a true view of where we are, and we may need to re-baseline. And one thing we find is because we ask for feedback, we get feedback from the customers, and that nuances requirements sometimes more than traditional projects. However, I've found experientially, and I think there's a lot of evidence out there, that that's truly a better thing. Because people can't tell you exactly what they want, but they sure can give you feedback on what they're looking at and playing with and using. When you have traditional EVM that requires you to have all the work packages up front, it also has a change management process. However, there's some differences, and I think many of you understand that. So that's my cautionary note. AgileEVM helps manage delivery by integrating the best of Agile, Scrum, and EVM. I'm arguing we can use all three of those best of parts and not actually invalidate any of those other perspectives. We can compare productivity without potentially creating such a problem with velocity that we've rendered it meaningless. I have a client right now that was starting to put schedule units on velocity, and one of their measures for their initiative is that they'll be able to measure productivity increases. And because they're putting schedule on that, the only way to measure velocity increase or productivity increase through velocity is by increasing capacity. And increasing capacity talks about dollars. So that can be very problematic. And this helps us prevent those kinds of things because we can compare productivity and financial measures. And to review some of the requirements of project portfolio management, we want to measure outcomes and not outputs. And when we combine Scrum and EVM together, I think we get an opportunity to really focus on the business value, which are outcome-based. Scrum helps us prioritize, and it deliberately asks us to prioritize and reprioritize to maximize business value. Scrum helps us effectively deliver to minimize costs. And EVM helps us to understand when to reallocate resources when costs are too high or the benefit is too low. So we take a look at Robert, Janet, and Katie, and when we add them all up together and they're able to look at different views of that same information and provide that transparently vertically through the organization that we really desire, that maybe traditional status doesn't make strong enough or focus on the business value or the outcomes enough, then I think we get into a lot of fun. And this is really where my philosophy is that creating software should be fun. And the reason I believe that is it's both creative and technically challenging. And when you put those two things together, if it's not fun, I believe that something is terribly wrong. So one of the things I look for is, are we having fun? And I look for that wherever I go. I want to thank you for staying with me. And here's some more places you can go. We have email for AgileEVM. Here's my email address. This information is available at version 1 as well as solutionsiq.com. And would like to open up with any questions that we might have.
Thank you so much for your presentation. We do have several questions today, and we encourage everyone to continue to ask questions throughout this session right now. So the first question we have is, what is the difference between an output and an outcome?
So output speaks on what is the business value that you're actually achieving, right? And that is a difficult measure to have, but that's really what we're trying to come up with. Outcomes are, did we deliver that project? And oftentimes, those two subtle differences are very, very problematic. And this comes right out of the literature for project portfolio management. A lot of the modern literature around that is that we really want to focus on the business value that we've attained versus did we manage our scope, schedule, and budget, and is that the most important thing? And the example I give, I know many people have achieved nearly 100% success in their portfolios. And one vice president that I'm thinking about, she said, we deliver well under our traditional methods. We, on time, on budget, all of our metrics say we were successful. And in reality, from an outcome perspective, 100% of our projects failed. And that VP, they moved to Agile for that one reason, right there.
Thank you. The next question we have is, how do you manage increased scope on an Agile project to calculate percentage complete? Scope seems to creep constantly, and percent complete can go down from week to week.
Yes, and that is where that spreadsheet you saw that we had this column story points added. That is actually recognizing that scope does creep in. And the reality is that it will always creep in. And I gave you a couple of, like Humphrey's uncertainty principle. We won't fully know until users use the system. And whenever we show something to users, they feel compelled to give us feedback. And that may not be enough. It may cause us additional work to go make sure that that's a good representative feedback of the entire audience of clients, customers, and users. So it is a challenge for us, and that's why we must constantly reprioritize. As a result of that, if we can constantly reprioritize, we can trim the tail. Right? There's a lot of literature around trimming that tail. And if we are truly prioritizing effectively, we're trimming the lowest value that we have.
All All right, the next question that we have is the third predictive formula similar to using rolling average velocity or last X iteration velocity?
I'm not sure what the third predictive formula, and I'm going to guess that they're talking about atypical. So at this point, those estimates are based upon the forecasting capabilities that give us different views through EVM, and the integration of Scrum and EVM gives us the ability not just to use average velocity, but to look at some others. And so what that is taking that atypical view isn't tempering those estimates at complete through any of the performance indicators. So it removes cost and schedule performance indices from that equation, and that is to acknowledge that historical data being accumulated over time throughout the project or the release. AgileEVM is really the scope of a release. So what that means is that those indices aren't really good indicators, so we don't want to take history into account. So that would be similar to a yesterday's weather, however, it's specifically using earned value management techniques.
The next question we have is, can you merge story points? And if yes, how would you do that?
Can you merge story points? Well, Scrum allows us to merge story points, allows us to split stories, at which point we are taking one larger story and decomposing that into smaller stories and then re-estimating those. So if I understand the question right, we're talking about taking two stories and merging them to make them one. Whenever you do that, Scrum and Agile best practices help us understand that that really involves the ability to re-estimate. And when we are actually merging or splitting stories, we are doing it at a time when we have a need or we have more knowledge. So the new estimate, and I agree, I would emphasize that we re-estimate at that point, that story, because it's now changed. It's either become many into one or one into many. Those stories must be re-estimated to account for the current knowledge, because this is a knowledge creating in a knowledge worker environment. And so the application of knowledge is vital.
Thank you. The next question we have is, can EVM be used with other Agile methodologies, including other than Scrum?
Yes, actually it can. The foundational paper, it's available, Solutions IQ, as well as IEEE. You can search on it, find it both places. It specifically focused around Scrum projects. However, if you have a release plan that's estimated using XP or anything else, then you can use it in the scope and context of a release. So absolutely you can use it on those other terms. It doesn't violate anything that I've ever found before.
Very good. We're getting a lot of questions around where they can download the spreadsheets that you presented.
Yes, solutionsiq.com. Those will be made available, and if anybody specifically wants to send one of those emails, AgileEVM or bbarton@solutionsiq.com, because you can't find it or for whatever reason, we'll be happy to provide that too.
Very good. So that is all the questions that we have at this point, and we're pretty much at a stopping point. So I will just turn it over to any last words for you, Brent.
Well, I would like to, again, thank everybody for coming. And it's exciting that I think AgileEVM has a place in the ecosystem of software industry. I think it's exciting that its value, in my opinion, is growing as we start looking at portfolios and not just projects. And I'm excited to continue to improve AgileEVM's rigor. It's already rigorous, but I like rigor. I've got a mathematics background, and if it helps people, then that makes me most excited of all. So thanks for everybody that's come and been able to attend this.